small room tonight, but anyway, it's intimate and cosy, very warm. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Boodja and pay our respects to the Aboriginal custodians of this land and elders past, present and emerging. This is a really, you know, it's interesting. Our media is caught up in the coronavirus. How convenient for that to happen right at the time when these bills are being shunted through Parliament, and the media has no space left over to talk about these things. And I just want to first start off by saying that one of the key aims of anti-discrimination laws is to protect minorities and the vulnerable, not to provide exemptions that legalise discrimination, as is the case with most of the exemptions for religious institutions in this bill that's before Parliament. And let's just say freedom of religion should also mean freedom from religion. So we've got three speakers tonight. I'm going to introduce first Christopher Crouch. He's the president of the Communist Party branch in Western Australia and a retired professor.
An unemployed.
And a working artist. Then we've got Tom, who's going to speak second. Tom has just finished his honours in psychology, and so he's out there looking for work right now. And Seamus, who's a member of the Communist Party branch, and he's just about to go back to study. So anyway, they've got themselves organised. Christopher's going to lead off the talk tonight, so thank you, Christopher.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. Just before I start, we've been working on this together as a team, and what we're going to try and do, the intention is, and of course we all know the gap between intention and actuality is often a very big one, but the intention is that I'll try and talk about the bill and its context as objectively as possible and set up some of the key problems that have been identified about it. Then Tom's going to look at some real life examples, and Seamus will conclude with all the exciting political and cultural analysis bits. So, to kick off, what I would like to do is try and establish an examination of the bill, not so much as something that is unique and kind of complete in itself, like a little rolled up hedgehog. It's not like that. It's more like a goods train on a railway system. It's a piece of information that's being shunted round the organisational mechanisms of the state. Where it's come from, where it stops, where it goes to, and what's unloaded from it is really, really important, not just in terms of the way in which we interact socially, of which it's a vital part, but also in trying to understand the mechanisms of communication that exist within the state. So that's the first metaphor. I haven't got any more planned, but I love them so much. We might get sort of bogged down in some extended ones that Tom will kick me under the table to shut me up. So I've got about 10 minutes worth of points. So I'll identify the point and then talk around it. So it's not like you're going to have a beautiful narrative that's being written by J.K. Rowling. It's going to be a bit clunky, but you'll just have to put up with that, I'm afraid. You haven't paid anything, so that's fine.
A raffle ticket.
Some people have paid for a raffle ticket. Just to remind you that there are raffle tickets available. And some wonderful. Please see Richard. Okay, so the first point. Where did the bill actually come from? Because it didn't spring out of nothing. It wasn't suddenly a concern that the Jewish and Muslim community were being bullied by sort of right-wing racist hate groups. It came out of a very particular circumstance, and that was the passing of the same-sex marriage law. And it was the pushback against some of the right-wing churches that suddenly sent off alarm bells in the conservative world. Now I'm going to try and be as neutral as possible, So all my eye rolls will be internal. So from this contestation that existed in the organisations that are part of the ruling class of Australia, is this sudden concern that their ideological power is being undermined. There were two incidents, two very minor incidents of legal action being taken against some individuals in some of the right-wing Christian organisations. But this was magnified suddenly into an attack, a sort of nationwide coordinated attack on Christian values. So the immediate response of the government was to launch the Ruddock Review on religious freedom. Its findings were mixed. They were hidden for a while, largely because they weren't dramatic enough for the people that had instigated the review originally. Its findings were that the most bullied religious communities were the Muslim community and the Jewish community, which didn't fit into the overarching narrative that was trying to be established. So its publication was subsumed for quite a while. One of its recommendations, there were 20 recommendations, and you can imagine how dull they all were, 20 of them. How is this one different from that recommendation? So the recommendation that was picked up enthusiastically was that the rights of religious organisations to exercise their beliefs in the social realm should be strengthened. So that was the stepping stone for the Religious Discrimination Bill, which has had two iterations. The current state that it exists in is the revision of the first failed bill, and it was released shortly before Christmas without a lot of fanfare. So it's something that the government, reading between the lines as calmly as possible, it was released at a point in the year where things that are problematic are usually released because everybody's mind is on something else. So that's where we get up to in terms of its genesis. Let's look at the context. Just briefly look at the context of religiosity in Australia. Now, the only figures we've got are those that come from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So, like all organisations, it is flawed. I doubt that it's the den of iniquity that the people who also hate the Bureau of Meteorology assume it is. It's as accurate as we can possibly get. So 52% of the population identifies as being Christian. Of that 52%, 22% identify as Catholic. So the biggest single Christian group in our country is Catholic. Other denominations are sort of largely often progressive, non-conformist churches, and the other rather weird American imports occupy about 16%. Then we have the smaller religions, Islam, within the Australian context, I hasten to add, running at 2.5%, Buddhism 2.5%, Hinduism nearly 2%, Sikhs at 0.5%, and Judaism at 0.5%. Those with no religion take up 30% of the this is non-sectarian, no cheering from the crowd. This is attempting to be as objective as possible. So 30% of the population identifies as having no religion. Now that indicates a huge sea change in the culture of multicultural Australia, where those that identified as Christian ran at nearly 90% in 1966. So we're talking about a massive change in ideas about faith, in the forms in which faith are expressed within a period of decades that, because of the circumstances I find myself in, and sheer fright I'm unable to do the sum to tell us how many years ago that was. 50 years ago. So 50 years ago, thank you, prompt, 54 years. So we see a nation in change. We see a nation in which the ruling class, whose ideological power is invested in structures that are waning. It could be interpreted that they are concerned with the issues that surround religious freedom in a way that might not necessarily be those that your average punter would be worried about. We also need to think about the difference, or the difference in state identification as Christian. So we have a Commonwealth, we have a federation. Cultural differences within the states are, in this issue, not huge, but very telling. So, for example, WA is amongst the least Christian states, running around at 50%, just under 50%. Queensland, on the other hand, runs at 56%, and New South Wales at 55%. And there is a difference between correlation and causality, but it is interesting that if one identifies the key figures on the Christian right, their origins politically in the state apparatus that they find themselves in. So that's where we are, as objectively as possible. We also need to raise the point that the rights for religious expression are guaranteed at every state level through legislation passed at state level in the 1980s, mid-1980s. The only two states that don't guarantee religious freedom at an absolute level, but it's covered in sort of other legislation, are New South Wales and South Australia. But every other state has cast iron legislation that says you cannot discriminate religiously. And that's important because the Constitution, National Constitution, makes it clear that state and church are separated, and that there must not be any kind of confusion between the legalities of secular life and religious life. Now, this is a point at which this new bill starts to muddy the water a little. One of the intentions of the bill is to regulate public life. That's one of its stated demands. That's fine. That's what we hope happens through legislation, that public life is regulated and made as frictionless as possible. What we expect, though, from a bill is that that regulation is as non-partisan and as objective as humanly possible. What does the bill not do? Well, there's a couple of gaps, and the first thing, because I've been going on for quite a long time, one of the many things that I needed to have said before was that, of course, I like the toothpaste adverts that proclaim I'm not a dentist, I'm not a lawyer, I don't understand the legalities of it. What I can track is the organisational and cultural issues. So this is what I've been concentrating on rather than the legal issues. And this is one that overlaps. The cultural and legal issues sort of overlap here to an astonishingly disturbing degree, because what the bill doesn't do is define what religion actually is. It makes an assumption that religion is something, and in its description of what religion might or might not be, it includes people who don't have religion. So it's a really, really very muddy and poorly conceptualized definition. And what it also does that is problematic is to bundle together religious belief and religious activities. So instead of saying there are two realms, there's the personal realm in which we exist in social relationships, and then there is the social realm. Those two have been conflated into one contiguous and continuous state, which is a problem. Its response, the response to the bill has been varying. There are those, of course, that think it doesn't go far enough. There are those that think it goes too far. There are two agents of change that we need to identify in the revision of the first bill. And the one that interests me is, well, the first one that interests me is the Catholic Church, who in their submission wanted the phrase vilify to be changed to threaten or intimidate. And I don't think it's drawing a long bow to say that this is the same linguistic debate, because language matters. This is the same linguistic debate that was conducted by the conservative right over 18C and race hate, where they wanted the general definition of vilification, which included to embarrass and offend and humiliate, to be taken off the books. That in order to discriminate, it meant that you really had to be horrible, but you can insult people, and that's perfectly fine. That's our legitimate right. And the Catholic Church argued that, as I say, vilification should be changed to threaten or intimidate, and that's been picked up in formal language of the new iteration. I can't find the exact words now, so we'll move rapidly on. That's not necessarily the biggest issue, but it relates more to those terms, the threaten and intimidate terms, than it does to the general accepted definition of what vilify is. All kinds of issues are at stake. The Catholic News Agency reported, for example, that the bill aims to ensure groups rejecting same-sex marriage are not stripped of their charitable status. So suddenly there's alarm bells ringing that sort of, sorry, is that really what a religious discrimination bill is about? That sort of you can retain your financial assets? And in the first iteration of the bill, there's all kinds of qualifications as to the cash value of an organisation, whether it was discriminating or not. I think the initial limit was $50 million. So if you had a $50 million religious organisation, then you couldn't possibly discriminate against it for some bizarre reason. So on to facts again. What are the three key objections to the bill? And there are many, but there are three key ones. And these are the ones that have emerged from the analysis from the Australian Human Rights Commission. As a general overview, it suggests that the bill provides protection to religious beliefs at the expense of other rights. Tom and Seamus will be filling out the flesh on that. But the idea is it's weighted towards religious or discrimination by religious organisations rather than protecting the rights of those who might be discriminated against. So it argues there are three key points. The bill is overly broad in defining the religious victims of religious discrimination. By that, it means the religious organisations that embody religious practices and religious ideology, and overly narrow in defining who has been actively discriminated against. It argues that there is an unprecedented argument for claiming that it is possible to discriminate against an organisation, a religious organisation. And then, in the next breath, for those organisations themselves to be exempt of discriminatory behaviour because they're religious organisations, they are acting in good faith in accordance with their teachings. Now, why is this a problem? Tom and Seamus are going to talk more about that. Seamus, are you going to talk about the Australian Christian body? Yes, okay. So we find that without wishing to steal Seamus's thunder, he's got all the juicy bits, it's not fair. The Australian Christian Lobby is incorporated as a business. It's very secretive about what its financial assets are. What this bill does is ensure that there can be no, or as it stands, there can be no legal action taken against it as a discriminatory body. And this unfolds or flows on to the third point that the Australian Human Rights Commission makes, is that statements of belief will no longer be unlawful. So you can believe whatever outrageous nonsense you want, but if you say that it's a statement of belief, then you cannot be prosecuted. And this contradicts anti-legislation, anti-discriminatory legislation at state level. So we're having a layer of federal laws that contradict those laws at a state level. So that's really the context of it. Here is this bundle of stuff whizzing down the roads, down the railway track, about to be delivered. Tom. Sorry, do you want to interrupt? No, sorry.
Can people hear me in the back?
Yeah.
There is a microphone there if you do need it.
Oh, if I need it,
Put your hand up if you
Yeah.
can't hear.
Tom, if you leave it there, but turn it on and we'll pick up.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure everyone here is here because they're a bit concerned about the bill. But I just want to share some sort of hypothetical scenarios that could take place after this religious discrimination bill is passed. I'm only including what is quite clear, and I think Seamus will kind of get into the more the contradictions of the bill, which there is plenty. So firstly, something that's quite clear in the bill, a scenario that could happen is that the bill allows private hospitals, such as St John of God's, to legally fire a member of their staff for observing religious customs, i.e. like a person of Jewish faith wearing a kippah. This is because the bill claims that an organisation may maintain a religious ethos within its staff. Secondly, a student from a religious school, most private schools in Perth are Christian, can legally be expelled for coming out as homosexual or transgender, even if the said student identifies as Christian. I think we'll get into that later as well. Similar to the last example, organisations are able to maintain a religious ethos and can expel students based on religious beliefs and activities. I might come back to that later on a more kind of personal note. Thirdly, Christian organisations would legally be able to deny housing to, say, a Somalian family looking for refuge in political refuge. Again, on the basis of their religious beliefs. Do we have a rational claim to be concerned about these hypothetical situations? As a member of the LGBT community in Perth, I believe we do, because I think we already see this sort of discrimination. It's just that this bill is giving it a legal basis to do it so. An example of this sort of discrimination that's already happening, I'm sure members of my community will remember 2 or 3 years ago, a high school substitute teacher was ceased getting shifts after he came out publicly as gay, despite the fact that he identified as Christian and was working at a Christian school. I myself went to a Christian school, and a student from a few years below me was expelled not too long after he publicly came out as gay. The reason he was expelled wasn't specifically because he was gay, but because he had accumulated a whole bunch of demerits for unsocial behaviour. But when that happened, I had a very vivid memory of a teacher, before this even happened, telling us, when me and my friends asked him if being gay was an expellable offence in school, his quote went something along the lines of, "No, you can't be expelled for being gay, but we would figure something out." Which was insane to hear. Another something else I also remembered while writing this down was that my year in the same school, no one from my school watching this.
I hope they are.
Yeah, I don't know what they are. My school year started with a lot more people of colour in my year than what graduated. A lot of them got expelled or left due to various bad experiences in the school, which I think is quite appalling. Yes, to basically summarise, I think these sort of discriminations that we're talking about already take place. It's just one thing that's concerning is that it's given it a more legal basis where it's clear, and then where it's unclear, I think it's also something to be quite concerned about.
Yeah, they won't need to think up excuses.
Yeah.
They can just blatantly discriminate. I think that's the thing to remember is that religious organisations already have considerable powers. You know, a Catholic doctor is allowed not to perform an abortion, but they're required to give you a referral to somebody who would. And as a patient, you should be able to expect that sort of help when you go to healthcare for a problem that you've got. James?
So Tom pointed out that a lot of the issues surrounding this bill are clear. And I'm going to take a dialectical approach to this question by starting with asserting the fact that these things are clear, and then I'll progress to saying, actually they're not so clear, and then resulting with, actually they are clear, but on a higher level. Because this bill, if you go and read the bill, it is deliberately written in a way, at least according to me, written in a way which is deliberately misleading and deliberately unclear. That doesn't negate the fact that the conclusions we can draw from it are clear, but we have to recognize what is going on in here. So for instance, some of the main opposing points that have been raised to the bill in the mainstream media even have been to say, oh, it'll mean that you could go to a chemist, or you could call up Centrelink, or you could do whatever, and they could say an openly homophobic or whatever offensive comment and say, well, this is my right, this is a religious belief, I can say this. And another thing that has been raised is saying that that certain medical services like contraception or abortion can be denied to people on the basis of religious beliefs. Now, you read the bill and you will find things in there which seem to make this untrue, but you read closer and you find that they've been put in there to make it seem like it's untrue, but it absolutely is. It's deliberately misleading. So, in the bill itself, there is a note to one of the sections saying contraception cannot be denied to someone on the basis of there being a single woman. You read that and you think, well, I guess that disproves that point. I guess that means that couldn't happen. But you read a little closer, you read other sections of the bill, and they're not they're not written in a way that makes this clear. You have to read very precisely. That absolutely can happen. Contraception absolutely can be denied under this bill for religious reasons, but only if it's denied to everyone equally. That's fine, that's fine. It can be denied to everyone equally. It just can't be denied to people specifically on the grounds of there being a single woman, which is a ridiculous scenario. Like, when would an organisation, a medical services provider run by a religious group, make the decision, well, we know what this bill is, we know what the provisions of this bill is, and that it can provide us the right to withdraw this service. We're going to make a provision whereby only single women or only women or whatever can be denied contraception because that's our religious belief. Surely knowing that that is explicitly prohibited by the bill, whereas prohibiting contraception to everyone, that's allowed by the bill. They could just say, we're not going to provide it to anyone, which is obviously what they'd do. It's obviously what they do. So the bill in the text is describing a scenario that would never happen. It's only in there to mislead a reader. It's only in there to make you think, oh, well, that couldn't happen. Likewise, the scenario of, say, an employee of whatever, you speak to them in person or on the phone or whatever, and they say to you, you sound a bit gay, and you know you're going to hell, because that's my religious belief. This is a statement of belief, and this is protected under the Religious Discrimination Act. Now you read the bill, and it says, well, actually, that can be prohibited by an employee conduct rule. So the employer can prohibit that. They can't prohibit people's religious statements outside of the course of their employment, but they can prohibit statements within the course of their employment. So I guess that's fine then. That sounds fine. Except it's entirely down to the discretion of the employer. And my question is, would the government that is pushing this legislation, would they make this a conduct rule for public employees? Would they go to the effort of making a conduct rule for public employees that they couldn't make such statements of belief? Because the default is, it's allowed. They could say whatever they want. They could say, this is my statement of belief. That's allowed. Now, what's interesting is, I think when we were all trying to approach this topic, we were all investigating the bill and responses to the bill and analyses of the bill. Our expectation was that the focus would be on LGBT rights and the way it would impact on LGBT rights. And that still, we must understand, is the ultimate cause behind this all happening, is the Liberal Party, they messed up with the whole same-sex marriage issue. They thought they'd win that, and they did not, and they're saving face. That is the ultimate cause behind this, and we can be clear on that. But investigating the bill, we find that there's even so much wrong with it on its own terms that it's hard to even get to those issues. It's hard because what would a good religious discrimination, religious anti-discrimination bill be? It would ensure that every person has the right to their private beliefs, their private practice of their beliefs, and within reasonable restrictions, reasonable circumstances, the public practice of those beliefs, so long as it doesn't interfere with anyone else's rights. That's pretty simple. What does this bill do? Does it do any of that? It doesn't do any of that, no. It is all about public expressions of belief, public organizations of belief. It's all about the public expression of religion and sanctioning that and giving that the force of law in many cases. And not only does that on principle not work, from a practical example of this bill, it works even less. This bill contains some of the most extraordinary provisions that actually sanction discrimination by religion in so many cases. It sanctions religious discrimination if it's being done by a religious organization, or if it's being done by anyone in the context of their own home. It specifically says you can discriminate by religion when choosing people to rent in your house, by choosing domestic workers in your house. So you could have a cleaner. Now, I was speaking to someone the other night and I realized the problem with making this point is domestic workers already don't have any rights. But imagine they did. Imagine you had to give a contract to your house cleaner, a proper contract, and they had rights. You could still, under this bill, negate the contract because you said, well, I've just realized you're a Mormon, or you're a Jew. I can say, on the basis of that, I can fire you because it's my house and I can discriminate against you. And that is sanctioned specifically by this bill. So even regarding religious discrimination, this bill does not fit the bill. It doesn't do that, and it's a product of the fact that that's not why it exists. It's not here to be a proper anti-religious discrimination bill, because we do already have state-based anti-religious discrimination laws, and it's not objectionable that we should have a nationwide, have a federal anti-religious discrimination bill. We should have that. This is not it. And this does not come out of a genuine principle here. This comes out of a reaction to the Liberal Party's failure to pass what they wanted to with regards to same-sex marriage. That's it.
Just before we move on to questions, there is an International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which was a multilateral treaty adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1976. And Article 18.3 of that states that freedom to manifest one's religion or beliefs may be subject only to the limitations as prescribed by law. Basically, limitations that are necessary to protect public safety, order, health or morals, or the fundamental rights and freedoms of others. So that does not allow for discrimination of religion that is going to negatively impact on the rights of others who are not of that faith. And so that's already there, and I'm sure Australia is a signatory to that, as we are to many other treaties. And but as usual, our government often chooses to ignore their responsibilities as being signatories to those treaties. So, Richard.